The first of our major lifts that we're going to talk about and demo in different progressions is going to be the deadlift pattern. And for those of you not familiar with the deadlift, I'm a big fan of this for cross-country skiers, especially in teaching the rib to hip connection. So a lot of people think of a deadlift as a dangerous lift because of the name and because of some experiences you've seen at some of your local gyms. You'll see a lot of big power lifters utilize a deadlift, and doesn't always look safe, and sometimes it's not, for sure. But when the deadlift is performed extremely well, then it's a very safe lift. Not only a safe lift, but a very good lift for developing hip power. So hip power, as well as that rib to hip connection that I was talking about, meaning that we're very connected and transferring force really well, especially through double pulling sequences. So when we're disconnected at the top of a double pull, we'll definitely get a huge lift from the rib cage and almost a pelvic tilt going anteriorly or the opposite way of where the ribs are going. And the problem is that you're going to lose a lot of energy. You're going to be not as powerful on every stroke, and because of that, when you multiply that every time you pull, that is a ton of energy that we're wasting. We're very, very inefficient that way. The other reason I really like the deadlift is because it's teaching a lot of hip strength and power. And a deadlift is a hip motion. And when we break this down, you'll understand that it's not a back lift. Another misconception is that you train deadlifts for your back. Your back is involved. It's involved as a stabilizer, just as your core is. And I would classify the back as part of the core as well. So anything really between sort of the thighs to the shoulders, I would classify as the core. Because if that's not connected, then you're losing that transfer of force. And again, it's all about transfer of force. When you dig in with the pulls, then initial rate of force development is what matters most. So the deadlift is hitting a lot of things. It's hitting that hip extension, okay, strength and power. It's looking at core stability and core transfer. It's also looking at scapular stability, another huge one for pulling. It's trying to pull us out of that neutral position. And so in holding strong and holding tension in this lift, you're actually developing much better stability in through all the rotator cuff muscles and all of the stabilizers around the scapula. So I really do like it. I'm going to break this down starting from where we want to start to introduce these for some of the younger kids. I'm going to start with just teaching the body weight hinge. So it's a hinge pattern that we're trying to do. We're going to advance that to a band, looking at some what we call pull-throughs. And then we're going to go into kettlebell, into straight bar, and even to trap bar as well. But you'll see the pattern is pretty much the same in all of them. So when we're starting to look at some of the younger kids, some of the 10, 11, 12, 13-year-olds at a young age, we want to be teaching them how to hinge properly. And what we mean by hinge is basically at the hip crease, being able to hinge our hips back so that we're not actually squatting. This is a big difference from the squat. So we're not getting a lot of knee flexion or knee bending in this. And that comes from being able to hinge well. And the reason we want to hinge at the hips is because that way we can keep the spine neutral. And the big thing about this lift is when we're being loaded, we have to be able to keep the spine in a neutral curve position. So the same curve that I have standing up tall here is the same curve in my spine that I'm going to have when I bend over and pick something up. The thing that changes is the hip angle. So we go from here to here and back up. But the way we get back up is actually from the glutes, okay? So when we're teaching that hip, I often get people just to do a couple knee bends here and hip bends and find that crease. Take the hands here and basically let yourself chop your hips back from there. And what we teach people is to stick your butt back, like stick your butt back like you're mooning someone, okay? And people seem to understand that for some odd reason. So we hinge back. If you feel a big stretch on your hamstrings, we're off to a good start. If we don't, it probably means that we're squatting and bending the knees too much and taking that stretch off, okay? So we're actually contracting that, we're shortening the muscle rather than actually elongating it. So first thing is we're starting at that hip width stance, okay, for the feet. So if I'm head on, I'm about hip width in my stance. Then I'm finding that hip crease and I'm pushing back and leaning forward. In order to get my hips back, I have to counter it with my upper body. So I hinge, push back, and then I'm teaching the brace, which is brace for a punch here. So you're stiff across the core and trying to be as stiff and wide as you can in your core. And then you're pushing the floor away, squeezing your butt tight, and driving your hips through. Okay, so we're getting as tall as we can, and in that top position, I should be rock solid here, rock solid in the glutes, and even rock solid in the quads, because that's going to help with our hip extension as well. Okay, so that's the first thing, is really getting them to understand that we have to keep this spine nice and long as we hinge back, and there's a lot of tentativeness in this because people think that by leaning forward, you're actually going to hurt your back a lot more. But in reality, what we want is we want to see that by leaning forward, we're actually going to be able to keep that spine longer, more neutral for a longer time. So when I go to pick up something lower and lower, the deadlift is actually the better lift than the squat, because in the squat we're going to see that pelvic tilt underneath and we're going to flex the back and load those discs. So don't be afraid to get people to really lean forward with that. So the way we actually can help out with that and give a little bit of stimulus here and feedback is by what we call sort of a pull through or a band resisted hinge. So there's a couple ways we can do this. One is by actually holding the band through the legs. But in the very beginner, I really like to step inside. So I get people to step inside and put that right on that hip crease that we talked about. So now you've got one of these monster bands, which is going to get more difficult the further you go into extension. So it really provides that constant stimulus going through. So once we actually get hooked up here, we're right around the hip crease, then all I'm getting them to do is almost like a ski jump, where they're going to hinge back, let the band actually pull their hips back, and then we're going to squeeze the butt tight. So this is a little different from the deadlift because I'm at an angle, because otherwise I'd fall backwards because of the band, but you can see that the hip extension is the same. So I hinge back, tight core, tight butt, and I stand nice and tall. So I'm just letting that band sort of help me hinge, and then I'm going to use my glutes, so you squeeze your butt tight to drive your hips through, back and through. Okay, so that is just a way of getting that, that stimulus and that feedback to actually utilize the glutes a little bit better. So now what we do is we say, okay, this person is hinging really well, so now we can get them into an actual lift. Now I'm not going to get them on the bar yet, especially at a younger age. The kettlebells are just fine. They're going to provide a lot of feedback. They're going to give you good body awareness, but they're not going to be too much to chew off. Sometimes the bar is a little bit hard to handle at a young age, okay? So what we would do is, you'll notice that I have this kettlebell here situated on a box. Now the block or the lift is there for some of these individuals who might actually have some mobility restrictions. So if we want to still teach lifting and mechanics, but we have some mobility restrictions, meaning that they can't actually pick that thing up off the ground without going into a big rounded spine, or they just can't get it for whatever reason, we'll bring them up a little bit. And we'll do this with our NTDC athletes as well, and some of my other elite athletes that I train. We'll still have them on those blocks if need be, okay? I'd rather them be in a nice position a little bit higher up than put the bar on the floor to inflate the ego but injure them along the way, okay? So we've got this lifted up. So we've got the kettlebell there. I'm just gonna surround, and again, this block is about perfect for the deadlift anyways, because we've got about hip width. So I'm just going to surround the bell here with my feet, and basically the handle of the bell is just in front of the ankle bones there. So if we were looking at it from this side here, it's just in front of my ankle bones. It's not very, sometimes we'll even set it further back to really tell them, like, to get them used to that hinging pattern, okay? So when we hinge down, same thing. I'm actually going to take my thumbs, I'm going to push my hips back, and I'm leaning in front with my shoulders to counterbalance my hips. From there, I'm going to grab the kettlebell, look forward. I'm sort of looking at horizon level with my eyes, and from there I'm really pulling my shoulders down my spine, okay? You don't need to sink into your shoulders, you just need to pull down and back so you're nice and tight in through the lats. Inhale, bracing your core tight, you push the floor away, squeeze the glutes tight to drive the hips through. Then we're going to hinge backwards. So I hinge my hips back, leaning forward, keep reaching my hips, keep reaching my hips, keep reaching my hips, and down to the ground. I inhale again, pack my shoulders, stiffen my core, push the floor away, squeeze the butt tight, drive the hips through. And again, on the way down, hinge the hips back, keep reaching, and down to where I started. So that's the kettlebell deadlift. And again, don't be afraid to stick with that for a long time, especially if you've got some weights that can progress up. We can start to use 2 kettlebells if we need to make it a little bit heavier, and then progress to the bar and the trap bar potentially. So once we then get, we can also as well, once the person's starting to develop the mobility, we can take that block away or at least lower it and get them closer to the ground, okay? And the same thing for all of these bars. Once the person is able to really get into the position well, create stability in that position, then we'll start to bring them down, but only when they have that, okay? So the bar here, very similar in terms of the setup. Now the only difference here now is that the hands are going to be on the outside of the shins, okay? So same thing when I set up, my feet are about hip width apart, and my hand position is going to be about a thumb's length outside of my shins. So quite close to the shins, not too far outside of that. When I'm looking at how far to come under the bar, if I were to look down over top of the bar should be covering sort of the knuckle of the big toe. So I look down, the bar's just right over top of that, okay? If they're wearing shoes, then it would be sort of that top lace there. But the reason I'm out of shoes as well is to make sure that if it's a minimalist shoe, I have no problem with that. If it's a running shoe, take the shoes off. Get them in their feet, bare feet, or socks. This is a great time to do it, especially when they're younger. Get them out of the shoes when they're doing their deadlifts and even their squats as well. Get them feeling the floor, nice flat, hard surface so they can actually drive into the floor, which is going to help glute activation, but it's also going to cause them not to lean forward so much, because when you push through in your deadlift, you want to be in more of the heels. So here's our setup. Okay, again, I'm going to, when I come down, I'm actually treating it like I'm lowering the bar to begin with. So I hinge my hips, and it's like I'm lowering that bar into the position. So once I'm there, I'm going to grab the bar just outside of my shins. I'm going to break, almost like I'm trying to break the bar in half to create a lot of tension in the scapula. We're going to close those shoulders off. Inhale, brace tight, lock the elbows, push the floor, squeeze the glutes through. Then I'm going to hinge my hips back, past the knees. Once I pass the knees, I can now start to bend them a little bit more to bring myself back into that position. So the bar is there for feedback. If I squat too much, the bar is going to push off of my thighs and around my knees, right? And what that's going to do is it's going to provide a longer lever. It's going to put more torque at the low back. It's going to cause you to round. You're going to see a lot of people, when they lower the bar, is when they're at most risk of injury, because their muscles are elongating and that bar is getting pushed away from them if they're doing it improperly. So again, we want to make sure the bar is coming straight up and down and we're moving our body around the bar. So again, set up, hinge down, grabbing the bar, inhale, pack my scapula, brace my core, push the ground away, squeeze my glutes, stand nice and tall. Way down, I'm hinging the hips back, the bar is coming straight down. Once I pass the knees, then the knees start to come through to lower me the rest of the way. And then the last one here we've got is a trap bar. And again, I'll just show you the trap bar on the blocks here. So the reason I really like the trap bar is simply, I'll show you the handles here, simply because the hands now are turned the other way, so the palms are facing in, and it actually really is nice for the shoulders to really set better than with the straight bar. I still really enjoy using the straight bar, especially for feedback. But if the person is hinging really well, the trap bar is sometimes a nicer way of learning to lift a little bit quicker for them. So the only thing we want to change here is the hands. Basically, I'm standing, same thing, in the middle of the bar. I want to make sure that my grip is in the middle of the handle so it's not going to waver up or down. But the hinge is the same. So we're hinging the hips back. Inhale, brace tight, push the ground away, squeeze the glutes coming through, hinge my hips back, and I'm down into that bottom position. Again, a couple things just to consider when we're doing those deadlift patterns. We want to make sure we're creating as much tension between the thighs and between the upper arms as we can. The more tension we have, the safer the spine's going to be, the more strength we're going to build, and then eventually the more power we're going to build, because remember, after this we're going to be looking at moving things explosively, such as just quick deadlifts, jumps, cleans, things like that are going to be a little bit later on in their athletic careers. But the more they have that foundation down and that tension built, the better. And again, from a ski standpoint, really making sure that we're thinking about that connection as we bring the hips through, very similar to when we come through. The faster we bring those hips through locked in, the better position they're going to be in a double pull position, and the less energy they're going to be wasting along the way. Okay, so let me know some feedback on that. If you want to talk about specifics of what I was talking about, please give me a shout. But have a play with those. Make sure, again, it's some body weight stuff to start, progressing to the band work, then going into the deadlift, and then we can start looking at the barbells. But keep it, especially at a young age, keep it light at first so they can get it down, get a lot of repetitions in while they're learning that movement. And then eventually, once they've got it down, then we can get them a little bit heavier along the way. Thanks.